Okay, so hi everyone. We're now live. We're starting the third day of the conference, the spring conference. So today we're with Larry. Give me 1 second. With Larry Rustboro, president of SSI Consulting. So for those who listen to our podcast, we did have Larry come in some special COVID-19 podcast with us. But today, I think Larry, you're gonna talk a little bit more about introduction to lean, and I'll let you present that. So just so you guys know, thanks again to our sponsors, Quanix Building Product and Springco Manufacturing, main sponsors for the Spring Conference this year. So Larry, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Stefan. So yes, today what I'm going to do is talk about a brief introduction to lean. We don't have a whole lot of time, so we're going to really condense it down, but I want to hit on a couple of key points for folks and let them know what we're going to do. And then as we discussed, the presentation will be available and people can always contact me afterwards and we can have a discussion if they want to have more information or want to get into a deeper discussion on lean. But I want to try and dispel a few of the myths and a little bit of the misconception about it, and then let people know what some of the benefits are to lean.
That's great. So maybe we can just start with your presentation. As I said, as you just said, we don't have tons of time, so we can do your presentation, and then just know if you guys wanna ask question directly, use your raise hand button as usual, or just go in the Q&A section and I'll read your questions to Larry. So Larry, you can go ahead.
And I think what we'll do is try and hold the questions for the most part to the end of the presentation. So as I mentioned, we don't have a whole lot of time. The presentation that I took this from is generally something that I would take about 5 or 6 hours to go through because we usually go through a bunch of exercises. So this is really going to be a high level overview, but we'll try and make sure we leave some time at the end of it.
Great.
So welcome everyone to our presentation on an introduction to lean. My name is Larry Rosborough, and as Stefan said, I'm president of SSI Consulting Solutions here in Atlantic Canada. So I promise not to have a long sales pitch, but just give you a quick information about who we are and why I'm talking to you today. So we are a business consulting firm here in Atlantic Canada. We specialize in small and medium enterprises, but we've worked with industries from 1 to 1,500 people. So we work across all range of things. And one of the biggest differences about us in our view of our vision of consulting is that none of us are career consultants. We're all people with experience in industry before we came into the consulting world. So to that end, there's the team that I have that I work with on a regular basis. So you can see by the amount of gray hair or lack of hair in some cases that we're an experienced group. At minimum, we have 25 years of experience before we get into consulting. In my case, almost 35 years of manufacturing experience before I decided to endeavor on this. So we got a broad range of things. We cover a very broad range of topics, but there are also things that we don't cover, and we're pretty clear about that when we're talking to people. All right, that's the end of the sales pitch. So what we want to talk about today is lean, and really, what is it? Some of you I know will have heard about lean, would have had some exposure to it, may have read some things, may have even gone to some conferences where it was produced or presented. And some of you probably have never had really any interaction with lean in the past. So what I want to do is give a brief overview today and give it to you from my perspective, both having implemented in my manufacturing career and now helping companies implement lean when I'm as a consultant. So really what you want to think about, the two key things about lean is it's a way to eliminate waste, and it's a way to look at value added from the customer's perspective or the end consumer. And that's important to think about because it's the value that the consumer is willing to pay for that we need to consider, not what we as the manufacturer or whatever other service that we're doing. So everything that we do in lean, we want to put the customer's perspective on this and say, is this something that they want to do? So what we want to do is look at it, very systematic approach to looking at a process, whatever the process is, and then say, how do we eliminate the non-value added activities? Now, some of you are saying, okay, that's great. We don't have any non-value activities. And I'll give you just a couple of statistics here in a minute. And they've pretty much proven out to be true from everywhere that we've gone in most reading that you do. So think about, how do we eliminate waste, and how do we do this from the customer's perspective? So it's really a strategy if you think about it. We want to look at waste. How do we define waste? So I'm not talking about what's going out in your dumpster at the end of a shift, or at the end of a day, the end of a month, but it's process, it's the activities, wasteful activities that we have. We also want to look at variation in our processes. So how do we help reduce that variation, which helps us? And we also want to look at work imbalance. And in here, I'm not talking about ergonomics. This is the imbalance that we often see through processes where there is big piles of work in process at one stage and almost nothing somewhere else. So we're trying to level that out. Now, an important thing to think about here is lean is not just a program or initiative. You go in, you spend a couple of months or a year doing this, and you're done, and away it goes. It really is a change to the way you have to think about your processes and the way you involve your people in your process. And we'll come back to that at the end, but it really is the journey. This is one of those things, it's not the end point that you're trying to get to, because we're always looking to continuously improve our process. And if we can improve that process, even little bits at a time, and we're continuously improve it, then we're never getting to the end. Toyota is, the sort of the gold standard when it comes to thinking about lean for the most part, in most people's minds. Every day they're looking at ways to improve their process. So that's what we need to think about in lean. You don't just go in, do it for a little bit and done. It's a continuous process that you do. Now, one of the things you may have noticed is I have not used the term manufacturing at this point. And the reason is that people think about lean only from a manufacturing point of view sometimes, because that's the term that people hear as lean manufacturing. Lean is about controlling a process or the activities in that process. So regardless of what your process is, so here's a very simple flow chart. You have a process in the middle, you have some sort of input from a supplier, and you have an output that you're going to give to your customer. That process could be an accounting firm that is doing our taxes. So they have an input from us as to all the receipts, all the information that we have. They have a process, a series of actions that they do, and then there's an output which comes back to me and goes to the government. But you can do lean around any process. So if you think about it, you define it as a process, we can apply lean principles to that and make it better and look for ways to continuously improve it. Now, I'm talking to folks in windows and door manufacturing for the most part, and we're thinking for the most part of your manufacturing processes, I'm sure, but you can also apply this to your sales process, your engineering process, and so on. So don't think about it just strictly in terms of manufacturing. You need to open that up a little bit. So, and I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. So, how would you define value? And I'm asking the questions rhetorically. I don't expect people to try and pop in and type in answers right now. But value is defined as an activity that your end consumer is willing to pay for. Not necessarily what they have to have, what you have to have in your process to do it, but what's the consumer really willing to pay for? And if you think about it, think about the last biggest purchase you made, a vehicle, a major appliance, piece of equipment in your plants. What is it that you really wanted to pay for? And then think about all the other things that are around that went into the price, but it really wasn't something that you wanted to pay for, okay? Now, I mentioned early on, one of the things that we need to control is waste. And it's really important to continuously improve a process to understand what the waste is and how to eliminate that waste. So again, not what you're putting out in your dumpster, but waste is an activity that consumes a resource, which is people, time, or materials, that doesn't add value as defined by the end customer. If you've got somebody running around in a fork truck, putting stuff in storage, taking stuff out of storage, putting it in storage, taking it out of storage, that's not value added to the customer. They're not transforming anything. That activity is a waste. Do you have to have somebody moving stuff around a fork truck? Yes. You got to receive materials and you got to put some materials away. But it's the amount of that you do, and maybe the way you have it laid out and the amount of time they have to do it, which could be a way that we can eliminate some waste and make some improvements. So if the end customer isn't willing to pay for it, in the end, it's defined as waste. We may still have to do it, but it's still a waste that we've got to be thinking about all the time. So some of you are going to look at this chart and say, I'm completely crazy, and I've been called worse. But there is a lot of waste in most processes. Whatever processes we have, there's a lot of waste in it. And this is typical of not just us, but many other practitioners that go in and look at companies and try them help them out with lean. 60% of the activities that we do are pure waste that have no value, and they really don't need to be there. 35% are waste, but they're still required. So I used the example of taxes before. You still have to have somebody in your accounting department do work to pay your corporate taxes, okay? The customer doesn't want to pay for that. They have to, but they don't really want to pay for that, but that's needed. But it's still not value added to the customer. 5% of what we do in most organizations is value added from the customer's point of view. So think about that and just take a second to think about in your plant, your office, wherever you're at, and think about all of the things that are being done on a regular basis within your organization, and which of those three categories do those fit in? And it's quite surprising. Now, those that are somewhat advanced in lean, you've already doing lean in your operation, you've sort of joined that revolution and you're starting to go along that way, you'll understand and you'll recognize that number's not very far off. So when we think about waste, though, it's good to have a structure around what is it that we're actually calling waste. So hopefully we don't have anybody on the presentation today whose name is Tim Woods, but it's an easy way for us to think about and remember what the different wastes are. So we'll run through these and give you some examples. So transportation. So I just mentioned one of the wastes in transportation. If you've got fork trucks running back and forth and multiple handling of something, then that's a waste. Inventory is a waste. Now, sometimes we think we've got a great deal and we're going to buy extra of something, some extrusions, some parts that we need. But if we've got to multiple handle that and store it and pay for the storage of all that stuff, inventory is a waste. And it's one that can be very insidious because things get lost in inventory sometimes. You can't run with zero inventory, but often what we see is way too much inventory. Motion is a waste. So if you've got operators that are doing an activity and they have to continually walk from place to place within their work cell or their work area because we haven't really laid it out as efficiently as possible, that's a waste. Waiting. So people that need to wait for information, products, or for anything else that they're doing, that's a waste of time while they're waiting for that. And it's very interesting sometimes where it could be a production operator that's waiting, but they're waiting for an updated drawing to come from the engineering department. They may be waiting for an updated change order to come from somebody to let them know what's going on. Or it could be they're just waiting for the process one step up for them to get done so that they have the product that we're doing. Overprocessing. So overprocessing is when we actually put more effort into doing whatever value added we're doing than we really should be. And sometimes that may seem very, very minor things that we're doing, but we may be doing too many things too often to a product or a piece of equipment that we're working on. And we're actually wasting, we're overprocessing, we're making it better than it needs to be. We'll come back to that. Overproduction. So if there's one waste that everybody has that we really need to get control over, it's overproduction. And that often contributes to all of the other wastes. And I'll go over that a little bit more in a slide. But overproduction is when, say, you're setting up, you're making a run. I came out of the tire industry, so we have an extruder. And I'm set up to make a run of a certain product, or I'm cutting an extrusion in one of your plants. And I've got everything set up so I need 10, but since I'm already set up, I'm going to make 20 instead, and then I don't have to reset up to make those 10 when I need them again. But I don't really need them till later in the week. Now I've got to take them, I've got to store them somewhere, and so on. You can see where that goes, where that becomes part of that waste. Defects are a huge waste. So when you are making product and it's not right the first time every time, and you have a defect, you got to go back and rework, or you've got to completely rebuild something, that's a waste. And then the last is the waste of skills and knowledge that we have. Too many times we have people within our organizations that really know the jobs, they know what needs to be done and what needs to change, but we're not tapping into that resource. So here's an example. It'll be there. We're not going to read through all of that, but I just want to come back to this one where I mentioned before about overproduction. So if we're making more than we need, sooner, faster, making extra parts for stock or stores just because it's convenient to do that, that is all contributing to waste. And then if you think about all those ones that I just mentioned there before, those all turn into a byproduct of that waste because I've got to store it, I've got more inventory, I've got more carrying charges, I've got lots of things. So those wastes are the key areas that we want to focus on when we go in and start working on lean. Now, some principles to think about. We need to think about from a customer point of view. We want to look at the value that the customer is willing to pay for. And we do that by using a value stream. It's a very simple tool to do, but it really exposes it. And I'll give you an example here in a second. As much as possible, we want to create flow through your process. And as close as we can get to one piece flow, the better off we are. So we're not making more, we're not making it ahead, and we're not being behind when we make it. So we want to do that. Ultimate would be to have the customer pull the product through your facility. They place an order, you start to build, and then it goes out the other end. And there's no inventory in between. You don't have stockpiles of finished product sitting somewhere hoping for a customer. Now, in some cases, that's not practical. In your business where you're doing custom orders for somebody that's building a new house, apartment building, office building, whatever it is, yeah, you can create that flow that way. But in some of you, you're building for big box stores. So you've got to create some inventory, and they're going to have the inventory in their hand. But we want to look at getting as close as we can to that customer pulling the product through, not based on forecasts. Forecasts are inevitably inaccurate. So if we can always do it based on a customer order, we're much better off. And the last part of these principles is that whole notion of continuous improvement. We always want to be looking at improving our process, whatever it is. So here's a typical layout for a value stream. It doesn't have any of the details in it, but you can see the little green part. So from your point of view, you've gone from a quote where you've got an order that's come in from a customer, and sometime in the future, you're going to get some cash. You're going to get paid for that order. You've delivered it and it's done. The bluish green boxes, that's the value added in that process. And that's all the value added that's in the process. All of the rest of this in red is waste. That's where we want to concentrate our efforts and try and eliminate that waste as much as we can by the tools that we have to us in Lean. And I'm not going to try and go through all those tools today, but there's a lot of tools that will help us. So some quick things to think about for this. A problem creates an opportunity. So we need to think about problems that way. We need to ask why 5 times. So when we do have a problem, we don't want to just stop at the surface level of solving that problem, but we want to ask why. Why did this happen? Why was that the situation? And we want to keep digging deeper and deeper as much as we can. We want to take advantage of everybody's ideas. So everybody in the organization can contribute, and we need to figure out how to pull them into that. We need to change our attitude sometimes and think of solutions that make the correction possible. Not think of all the ways that it won't work, but think of the things that make it possible. We want to reevaluate fixed ideas, which is a real key one for me. I love when I go in and talk to somebody and they say, oh, we do it that way because we've always done it that way. Okay, that's a good place to start. Why have we always done it that way, and can we make it better? We don't need to be worried about excuses when we're going through lean. We want to get to solutions, and we want to get simple solutions, not maybe the perfect solution. The perfect solution often involves a huge amount of time, money, effort. Let's look at simple solutions to make little corrections and keep making those corrections, as opposed to making the one big silver bullet that's going to correct everything. We need to correct mistakes as we find them quickly. We need to be crafty and use your craftiness, not your cash. There's a lot of great ideas that when we tap into people, and there's a lot of low-cost solutions to making things happen. And again, as I said, it's continuous improvement. We always want to strive for continuous improvement. Now, one of the first things that most companies get into when they're doing lean is 5S. So I want to talk about that just a little bit, give you some examples. It is not just about cleaning up a workspace, but I want to draw your attention to this comment here. It has a major impact on productivity, efficiency, as well as health and safety. There's not many tools that you can pull out of your toolbox that can do all of that in one shot. So I will not pretend to be able to pronounce these Japanese terms. I used to be able to do it many years ago when I first started studying this. But what you have is 5 terms. That is why we call it 5S. And oftentimes people think about 5S as, oh, we're just going to go in and cleaning. And it's much, much more than that. It's really getting rid of the things that aren't needed in a workspace. So if you pick a typical workspace, it's making it simplify the layout of things so people are exactly where they need to be. You do some cleaning on it. Standardize, so you don't have a whole lot of extra stuff that you don't need there. And most critically, you have to sustain it. And sustain comes from the operators doing a little bit every day to make sure everything's put back in its place. The old saying, a place for everything and everything in its place, that has to be done daily or shiftly if you're running multiple shift operations. But the leaders, supervisors, other leaders from the organization also need to be looking at this and helping the operators and continuously improving this, but looking and with a critical eye and saying, are we maintaining the areas the way that we said that we would? So a couple of clip examples, because people like pictures usually. These are real examples, so these are not made up. This is a real work area, not one that I worked on, but it's a real work area where this is what it looked like before they started 5S. This is partway through the process in the bottom. They're not done here, but it's partway through. But if you look at that, just a simple thing is I need to get a level. If I'm working in that area in the top and I need to find a level to do the work, it's pretty hard. Now it's very easy where it's at. And oftentimes you'll see people create shadow boards. So you actually have an outline of every tool. But it really, really speeds up things. And you can see just by looking at it, this is a much safer work area than here. Now there's still work to do on this one, but that's just partway through the process of what you can do. You can apply it in offices as well. So I would imagine that most of us have seen, worked in, or currently work in an office that looks like the picture on the left. So you can apply lean principles, in this case with 5S, to help improve that. And just the amount of clutter that's on the floor, this is a much safer work environment. And again, this is a work in process. They still have some work to do. And here's probably my favorite example, quick example. Again, a real process where this is what it looked like on the left when people used to go and look for some of the supplies they need. Here's what it looks like on the right. Very evident where things are. It's labeled. And in most of these, underneath some of these ones you'll see, there's actually a little reorder card. So if you take the last bottle or the second last bottle, whatever it is, it tells you how to get new ones and restock the area. So it not only is organized, I can find the things, but it also helps with my ordering process. So lean has a big impact on people. And you can't do lean properly without involving your people. So they get to have a say more in their process and how it should function. It doesn't mean that you completely revamp everything because somebody's got a wish list that they want something moved somewhere, but people do have more of a say. Workplaces are more organized and they're safer. A more organized workplace is going to be a safer one. it's easier for people to do their jobs because the tools that they need are at hand. The tools that I need once a month are now stored away somewhere. They're not right in my workplace. I don't need to be tripping over them or fumbling over them. When you're doing lean, people tend to know what to do and when to do it more because you put systems in place. So some of you may have heard of Kanbans. So that's a reordering system throughout your process so that there's a signal back to the previous operation to say, okay, start to make, but don't make more than what the Kanban calls for you to do. And processes are standardized. And this is really critical. Standardized processing is not a standard work operating procedure or an SOP. Standardized work processing is really much more than that. It goes into much more detail. But one of the key things is you then know when you have it that everybody's doing it the same way. It's not done differently from crew to crew or operator to operator. And it's a big improvement when you go to move new people into your organization, train somebody, because everybody's doing it exactly the same way. So, is lean relevant or important today? Yeah, absolutely. I don't need to tell you folks that, we're in a global economy. I spend most of my time in Atlantic Canada. And we're losing ground in some manufacturing, not always, but in some manufacturing, globalization. You're dealing with a product for the most part that's not easy to ship long distances, which is a benefit. But if somebody figures out how to do that and really gets their costs lower and can do it in a much lower cost country, that's going to cause you a problem. So whatever you do internally to lower your costs, improve your process, reduce your waste, that's going to be a benefit to you. Okay. And we just can't afford to have anything wasted today. We can't afford the resources. We can't afford the time and energy of our people to be wasted. Now, lean is not a panacea that solves all problems, and it is work. So it requires a substantial change in our organization. Those of you that have gone through it and have done some work in lean already, you know that this isn't having somebody like me come in for a week and boom, everything's done. There's a lot of education with people, a lot of things that are explaining it to them. One of the things that I often hear is people don't want to change. They're afraid of change. People are afraid of change that they don't understand. And it's very critical when we go through lean that we're explaining why and how we're doing these things. And when people understand that, they buy in big time. But this bottom part is very crucial. I came out of an industry for 29 years where the equipment was extremely expensive. And when it wasn't running, there was a lot of concern. 24-hour-a-day operation, and people were very concerned. We measured time in hundredths of a minute. So even seconds weren't a fine enough one. And when I would tell my boss that the $25 million extruder that we had invested in only needed to run 8 hours a day, I was called crazy at the beginning because we paid $25 million for this thing. It's got to run 24 hours a day. No, it didn't. And in fact, running it more would have been more wasteful. Eventually, we got more things capacity. We needed more of the capacity of it. But we need to understand with lean is sometimes we're going to idle some equipment because we don't need to be running it right now. So does lean make sense? I'm getting right to the end here. It is customer focused, which is critical. It strives to continuously improve, and we need to be continuously improve. We're looking to eliminate waste, and we're looking at the value from the customer perspective. It is holistic. So we're not looking at one little slice of the operation. If we're doing manufacturing, we're looking at it from stem to stern to make sure that everything is there. And we try not to get people to allow them back into their silos. Everybody has to work together on this to make it work. The engineering department has to work with the planning department that has to work with manufacturing to make sure that everything is flowing the way it should. There's a high level of employee involvement in this, and it is a great way to improve morale. And it's simple. It's not the quickest thing, but it is simple. Okay? So think about this at the end. It reduces your cost, provides companies with a competitive advantage to ensure long-term success by enhancing customer value. What the customer is willing to pay for. All right, Stefan, did I meet my time reasonably close?
Yes, right on the dot actually. So we still do have time for some questions.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing and then If there's some things there that we need to answer, I'll try my best to answer. If not, the presentation will be available and I'll have my contact information on there. So if somebody wants to reach out to me at any time, feel free. I don't have a problem answering questions at any time.
That's great, because that was the first question by Michael, actually asking if the slide presentation will be available. So as you just said, yes. And as we mentioned yesterday, all presentations, all webinars as a whole, they're going to be on our YouTube channel. You'll get links for those who paid for the conference. You'll get links faster, and eventually within the summer, we'll probably share some of them to all membership. But yes, so for the presentation, Larry will send that to us, and we'll be able to post it. Question from Terry: do you have more detailed suggestions to create buy-in top to bottom and bottom to top?
Yes. In fact, I usually like to start with some of the senior people in the company, because if they're not engaged in really looking at this, it's not going to work. They have to be as bought in as much as the operator on the floor anywhere. Before I start anything with anybody, I go in and I spend time talking to people about what this is, and I try to give them examples. As I said, this is a very short 30-minute presentation. Oftentimes we would take a full day to do this presentation. We'd even do some simulations so people can see some of the more detailed concepts. But it really is a matter of talking to people, working with them, and allaying their fears. The biggest problem that people get into is they think they want to start this, they don't lay the groundwork, and people are afraid. And people are afraid to change. But you can allay that by explaining what you're doing and how it's going to make it better. When you can show people real examples of workplaces where it's better than it was before, they buy in pretty quick. And if they know they're going to have a say in some of this, they really get bought into that.
So it's all about what when you come in and present, the full presentation, and not just what you just presented to us, but the full day, first day. Like usually, that's where you feel like they buy in, right?
Exactly. And like I say, when I start, I spend a lot of time. If I'm going to work with a group of operators, because usually we end up working in small groups or teams, and then we move to the next one. We do different things depending on what the value stream is showing us. The last place that I did it, I actually started with a sanitation crew.
Okay.
And we started with a very small area. But the first thing I did is sat down with them and said, hey, if you could have your choice, what would you change about your work environment? I can't change your job, but in this work environment you're working at, and I mean, we filled a page easily. Okay. And once they knew they were being listened to, then it's like, well, can we do that? Well, I usually make sure I've got somebody that can make a decision with us. And it's like, okay, why can't we do that? And I'll challenge people openly. Why can't you change that? We can move things around. It's not that expensive. I mean, I've moved a lot of equipment around in big organizations sometimes. Most of the stuff that we deal with is small stuff that's not that expensive to move. It's a matter of putting it in the right spot so it's not in the way when you don't need it, and away we go.
And what are the biggest challenge you face? Like, is it when you present it to the actual workers, like the team on the floor, or more the management? Like, what's the biggest challenge you think?
The challenges are different because the team on the floor want to know what's in it for me. So any change management that anybody's ever studied and looks at, one of the first things you got to do is what's in it for me. So when I talk to people on the shop floor, I can articulate very quickly, we're going to make your workplace better. It's going to be cleaner. It's going to be more organized. You're going to spend less time running around looking for stuff, all of those things which they'll buy into. Sometimes they think we're trying to do this to make them work harder. And in fact, almost always it's to make their work easier. The fact that they get more productive is the benefit that comes out of it. When I'm talking to managers and leaders, the problem is what they want to see is the return on investment, which is great. What they don't understand is they need to participate. They need to be actively involved. When I first started studying lean when I was with my previous employer, every event that we did, I had 300 people working in my department. And for the first year, every event that we took on, I was part of that event. We might take a full week to do something, but people saw that I was bought in. And that way they knew that when we made the change, we were going to do it. So that's a big part of it with the leaders. They need to understand they've got to invest some time in this as well. It's well worth the effort to invest that time.
And just for precision, when you talk about an event, it's basically putting an action in place, something you lead, something you decide, okay, this is what we need to do, and now you need to actually do it. So that's, am I right? Is that what you mean?
Exactly. So 5S that we talked about, where I gave the examples, that's the easiest ones for people to think about. We'll go in. It's nice to have a full week. Sometimes we do it in 1 day blocks over a series of weeks, but you go in, you think about a 5 day thing that you're going to do. Spend some time training and educating up front. You start to do the work, you put the things in place. The very last thing you do is put the sustain part in place.
And
How do we check it? How do we make sure that it's done? And then you move on to something else. And the operators will sustain it as long as they know it's important. And that's where the leadership comes in, because they have to go back and revisit every once in a while and say, yeah, hey, good job, you're still doing this. Or wait a minute, this is out of place. And it's okay to say things are not exactly right, because that's how the operators know that it's important. Nobody ever comes and checks. How important is it?
And how do you sell the fact that maybe you'll need, like, let's say a week to put one of these things in place, like money wise? And I know that probably the return on investment on the long, like short, medium term is there, but you still probably need to convince people to stop something they're doing to rearrange their whole process. So
yeah, so the one I'm doing right now, it's a smaller organization, and they can't take a week block of time. So we've gone in, work with them and their schedule. So I do like a day this week. I've probably done it over about a 5 or 6 week period, but I've just done a day at a time. So we don't have to take the whole week and shut everything down. There are some places where either time of year, there's more flexibility to do some things, and maybe you can put a group of people together, hold that group together for a week, and actually make some amazing changes in a week. And I keep coming back to a week, because that's really what we try and strive for. Is we want to make the change in a short period of time and make it sustainable. So we don't need to take months and months and months and months to make a simple change. Let's do it, test it, make sure it works, and away we go. Okay. And it becomes, it's a bit of an iterative process sometimes, but it also gains momentum. Somebody sees that you've done something here, you've listened to the operators, you've made the changes that they were looking for, you've made it better for them, and then the next thing you know, other people are saying, when are we going to get our chance?
Yeah, gets easier.
Yeah,
absolutely. Concept. Yeah.
Yep.
We have Damasceno asking, you mentioned don't start a journey without laying out the groundwork. What could you tell us that explains in more details what this groundwork could be or look like?
So the first thing is to get information. So if you're in a leadership position, you want to start the lean journey, you need to understand it a little bit more. Like I said, this is a teaser. It really is, folks. I mean, even at its basis level, I would normally present for a day to let people know some more of the details. We can have more interaction. So if you decide you want to go on the journey, you need to get more information than what I've been able to give you today, and get more of the details of it, understand how this works and everything else. So that's the first step of it. Then you need to get the commitment of the organization that you're in. Now, that doesn't mean everybody has to go, yeah, I'm all for this, but you need to at least say, you've got a critical mass of the people that are in decision-making positions that are going to say, yeah, I'm going to support it. We're going to do it. We're willing to try this. And then you bring somebody like me in, or whoever. There's lots of people out there doing this. And we will start to really lay the groundwork with people as to what we're going to do. The very first thing we do is an assessment of where you're at today. We want to understand what you're at, what your knowledge is. And then we will probably start with some sort of a quick diagnostic to say, where can we make the quickest gain for you so that you can see success, and then that success breeds more success.
Okay. We have Terry asking, you mentioned 60% waste. What do you think is an acceptable improvement beyond perfection is?
Well, I haven't seen perfection yet. I have seen many places that will take that waste and cut it in half in a year. If they're dedicated, they'll cut that in half in a year. That's not hard to do usually, because out of that 60%, there's a whole lot of things. It's the low hanging fruit analogy. You can go out and you can start just chewing away at some things. Where it becomes more tricky is if there's something that is really institutionalized within an organization that says, this is the way we have to do it. So part of my job then is, if I'm facilitating this, is to start challenging people. And I don't have a problem doing that. I do it respectfully, but you need to challenge some of those sacred cows, if you will, because sometimes there are actual requirements. If I'm working with somebody that is part of their operation is governed by Health Canada, for example, so there's certain things they have to do. Okay, we're not going to change Health Canada's requirements on, certain things. But there are things that people said, well, we did it this way in this industry, so this is the way we have to do it here now, and we think this is what it means with Health Canada. Well, sometimes you pull it out and you look at it, no, that's not what it is. So we can change that, and let's start working away at it. So, but to make a 50% reduction is usually not hard.
Okay.
The farther you go, the harder it gets, because now you're starting to deal with smaller increments.
Sure. Good. So we have Jeffrey asking, what strategies can you use to keep lean changes implemented when the company hits a busy time?
So that's usually one of the challenges, and that's where this, whether it's 5S with sustain or other things that you do, it's to make sure that you've ingrained it enough, and that you're spending enough time going back and looking at it to understand if things are starting to slip. And if you're coming into a busy season, your businesses are quite cyclic. If you're in that point and you're trying to do something right before the beginning of the busy season, then you want to make a change that really can't slip back. So some of those, you reconfigure how your machines are laid out. It's pretty hard. People aren't going to probably move them back into another location. The things that are easier to slip is, are people following the production schedule the way that you've changed it to now? Are they starting to overproduce again? Is the storage areas being maintained? And things like that. It's just vigilance, and you just need to do it. You need to understand it. Again, people will react to what they know is important. So if you put a change in place and you're checking to make sure that it's holding, people will continue to do it. If you ignore it, it wasn't that important, and I'm going to go back to doing it the way I did it before.
Yeah, so you have to be committed. It's like everything, right?
This commits the whole organization to change. It really does. And it's positive change. It really is. I've never seen it not be a positive change within an organization.
Great. Well, so that's our time for today. I want to thank you for this presentation. We had a couple of good questions here. Maybe we'll post your slide deck on the website, so we'll for sure do it. We'll have your contact out there. Please don't hesitate to contact Larry. He's working with us now, and he'll be happy to help you work with your company. So anything else to add to that?
It was my pleasure. It really was. And I really appreciate the questions. It makes it easier. I'm used to presenting in front of people where I'm standing there in the interaction. So this is a little bit different. So it's a good experience for me. But really, the questions are very helpful, because it also helps me understand where are people's interest in, and how do I make the next presentation better. So I'll send this off to you, Stefan, later this afternoon. I'll add my contact information. At any time, folks, people reach out to me. More than happy to talk to people about this and see if I can help you in some way.
Awesome. So thanks again, and for those who are going to attend the next event here, it's going to be the Supplier Showcase, so don't miss it. We're going to have some great products there. Thanks again, Larry, and talk to you soon.
Thanks for the opportunity. We'll talk to you later.